Yeah, so why don't we go ahead and get started?
Sure.
Okay, welcome to the LGBT Center Libraries virtual event with Zaina Arafat. I am the librarian, Brittany Burchett. This event is co-hosted by Quail Ridge Books, so I want to thank Renee and Kaylee over there for helping to set this up. And if you want to buy the book, I would encourage you to buy it from them. They will have signed copies of the books if you buy from them, so that is exciting. When our library is opened up, we should have a copy as well. I would also like to thank the team at Catapult Publishing and Katie Boland for helping to organize this. And most of all, thank you to Zaina for coming. So y'all have probably seen Zaina's biography, but she is a queer Palestinian American writer. Her debut novel, You Exist Too Much, was named a novel to look out for by Oprah Magazine and Electric Literature and several other publications. She was selected as a champion of pride by The Advocate, which is very cool. Her stories and essays have appeared in a lot of different publications, including The Atlantic, NPR, The New York Times, Vice, BuzzFeed. She holds an MFA from the University of Iowa. And so she will start us off reading from the book, and then she and I will have a conversation about the book, and then I will open it up to questions from the audience. So Zaina, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to read from You Exist Too Much, my novel. I'm going to read from the ARC. So, all right. I'm reading a section that comes a little bit later in the book, but I don't think it needs much explanation. So, or it doesn't need much setup. Okay. Okay. Where do you live? The professor wrote me. We'd met the previous summer, almost a year earlier. She taught French literature at the Alliance Française in Midtown East, in between semesters at Columbia. On the first day, she'd announced that past students had told her she didn't smile enough. So, she said, placing her palms on the edge of the desk and leaning forward smiling, as if to say, "Here you go." I'd loved her since the day she kept me after class and suggested I was too harsh on Emma Bovary for her childish fantasies and for cheating on Charles. Emma's pathetic, sure, she said, pressing a polished fingernail to the word méprisable on my paper. From the dinosaur band-aid on that same finger, I surmised a husband and kids. But this is melodramatic. She looked at me, paused, then offered an effortful smile. For the first time, I noticed the dimple that appeared above her lip when she smiled, like a second, smaller smile. While we stood there, I began to fall into its span. As I gathered up my things and walked towards the classroom door, she asked, "Is it so bad?" I stopped and turned towards her. "Is what so bad? To have an affair?" she asked. Her question seared. It felt both suggestive and forgiving. At the time, a photo of Eliot Spitzer and his scorned wife, Zilda, adorned the front page of the New York Post. I felt myself blush. "I don't know," I said, "but it is in this country." She laughed. Her laugh was deep and started in the back of her throat, getting increasingly lighter as it worked its way forward. "True," she said. My body surged with heat. When I got home that night, I Googled her. I discovered that she wrote fiction. A short story with her byline came up, a simple piece about a woman struggling to keep her marriage intact as the other couples in their circle divorced. I wondered if it was based on truth, and I searched for details that matched her reality as I knew it. During class the following week, I made a point to mention it. "I read your story," I said, nervous to admit it, and tingling with excitement, as though I'd accessed some part of her that was now laid bare between us. "Oh," she said. She nodded once, then offered the smile. "Thank you." She appeared not to care whether I liked it, confident that it was good without my approval. Still, I felt encouraged to say, "It would be nice to meet up sometime, maybe after the class is over." She nodded in return. It would. We met in early September at the Nespresso store in Midtown East, 3 blocks from our classroom. I showed up in a pencil skirt and a silk sleeveless shirt. The conversation flowed. She talked about walking her daughter to school, her husband's startup, their vacation home in Saint-Paul-de-Vence on the Côte d'Azur. I tried to match her level of privilege and exposure. "I've been to Nice once," I said. I didn't mention that I'd gone with Kate, my ex-girlfriend, towards the end of our relationship. I was worried that, as a straight French woman, the entire concept of queerness would make her uncomfortable. We ordered cappuccinos. I resisted asking for skim milk so as not to seem too weight-conscious or too American. I felt slightly tipsy as we left, though we hadn't drank anything. When the bill came, I hesitantly asked if she would send me some of her unpublished writing to read. She placed her credit card on the table as I reached for my wallet, waving my hand away. "You want to read more from me?" she asked, sounding almost suspicious. I panicked. Until then, I'd felt emboldened, but her response was humbling. "I thought I'd ask," I said, "if that's okay." "Sure," she said. She smiled again. It was starting to feel more natural anytime she did so. "I'm just surprised is all." We stepped outside the cafe, and as we walked off in different directions, I felt overwhelmed. I wanted her life. I wanted to live inside her life while still living inside my own. I wanted, above all, for her to like me. 2 days later, when she still hadn't sent any of her work, I followed up. 3 essays arrived in my inbox that night. She seemed to be a guarded person, so reading her unpublished writing was like cutting to the front of a long line. I couldn't believe how much her inner world resembled mine. The problem was asymmetry. Not only was she straight, but she had a husband to share her inner world with. I presumably had Anna's world, my girlfriend at the time, yet somehow hers was never nearly as captivating. I read each of her essays several times. "They're nice," I wrote in response, still afraid to shatter a veneer of detachment. A month later, we went to lunch, but I couldn't eat. I wore a dress that once belonged to my mother, her gold hoop earrings, her Michel watch. Anything beautiful that's mine was once hers. Now that I'd read the professor's writing, now that her sapphire wedding ring was refracting light from every surface, I was too conscious of my motions to land the fork in my mouth, so I stopped trying. "Sorry," I said, laughing dumbly. "I can't eat and talk at the same time." She'd chosen a place on the Upper West Side known for its burgers, but I ordered a salad. I imagined she was judging me in that moment. I'm familiar with that judgment, but still, how could I eat something so unsexy as a cheeseburger in front of the sexiest woman in the universe? She continued to look attractive and in control as she ate her burger, chewing with unapologetic authority. I had the ridiculous salad packed up, though I knew I'd never eat it. When the check came, I offered to pay. I'd looked up the place beforehand, cash only, and I fumbled self-consciously through bills fresh from the ATM. My eyes began to blur. I put down too much for the tip. We got up and left, and the minute she turned the corner from the restaurant, tears spilled down my cheeks. I was certain that I'd given myself away by not eating, though I admit, by then, a part of me wanted her to suspect. Thank you. I'll stop there.
There we go. Sorry, I was
Okay.
unmuted. Thank you. That was really lovely. I remember reading that part in the book, but it was nice to hear it in your voice.
Thank you.
So I wanted to start by getting you to talk about this overarching theme in the book. I read this article that you wrote on LitHub where you talked about this book essentially being about the desire for the unattainable.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to let you sort of explain that and talk about that.
Yeah, so indeed, a lot of this book is centered around wanting what is unattainable. And I think, so the book began for me with a question, which is, why would somebody, why would somebody set their sights on something that's off in the distance rather than what's right in front of them? Like, what is behind that, and what kind of person would do that? And in that way, I located the question in love, and in this character basically setting her sights on women that are unattainable in some way because they're either straight or married, or there's some sort of professional boundary. And so that's, that I then set out to explore why this character would do why she would do that. And I arrived at some answers in the process of writing the book. And the question also sort of exists on a cultural level as well, because she's Palestinian. And for Palestinians, the concept of, or not even the concept, but statehood and self-determination, these are unattainable things as well. So the question of unattainability existed on two levels, and I was able to arrive at some answers as to why she would set her sights on unattainable women.
And the part you read from mentioned her eating disorder.
Yeah, that's right.
This poor girl has so much going on.
She really does.
I remember that you mentioned that hunger also, that eating disorder and her hunger also had something to do with desiring what you can't have.
Yeah.
Is that another element of that?
Yeah, so that's precisely right. So in the case of this novel, right, as you said, the character has an eating disorder. She has anorexia, or had at some point in her past. But it factors into the novel. And it's, there's a link between appetite when it comes to there's a theme of suppressed appetite or shame surrounding appetite, which I think is part of why she sets her sights on unattainable women. It's because she can't really fulfill that appetite, and therefore sort of prevents herself from doing so, because there's so much shame around that, by not by setting her sights on these unattainable women. And in the same way, when it comes to the eating disorder, there's the repression, the suppression of appetite, the shame surrounding it, and essentially starving oneself when it comes to basic needs like food and love. So
yeah. That's interesting that you should mention shame, because I almost found, obviously there were a lot of places in her life where she wasn't open about her sexuality, but in some ways she didn't seem open about it to herself.
Right.
It was like it was sort of blocked off in her mind a little bit.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, so something that she struggles with is internalized homophobia. And it explains a lot of her behaviors, but it also is, as you say, a kind of, part of that internalized homophobia for her is a denial of her, queerness, essentially, and kind of trying to, refusing to recognize that, and hiding that even from herself, and engaging in behaviors that are meant to sort of I guess repress that part of her, because she refuses to see it, refuses to acknowledge it.
Yeah. And that comes out a little bit in her interactions with her own community, because it was, I guess, a little startling how not only she doesn't really fit in with that community, but she can be kind of cruel to people in that community, I guess, when she outed her first female lover. And I guess that's, why did you think it was important, I guess, to give her that cruelty?
Yeah. Because of the fact, the reason why she has that sort of cruelty, and which, I mean, the reader is aware of, and at some point she is aware of as well. But the reason that exists is because it's a manifestation. There are many ways in which one internalizes homophobia and the way that one like responds to that internalized homophobia. Like one way would be, in her case, to engage in like self-destructive behavior, to kind of like hurt people because she can't, first of all, she like wants to thwart the possibility of an actual relationship with a woman because that's just too hard for her to accept. And at the same time, she needs that, and so she goes towards it, but then in some way like engages in some behavior that will destroy it. And so like in the case of outing her first female lover, I mean, I think part of it is like a projection of self-loathing. And I think another part of it is a desire to kind of see what the response would be from her Arab community to anybody being like queer. And so when she outs that lover and finds that the people in her Arab community are like, oh, wow, that's like, they're disgusted by that person who is queer, that I think further reinforces her own homophobia.
Yeah.
Testing
the waters a little bit.
Right. I mean, she certainly can be really painful to watch, and I mean, does things that are just hurtful to others and to herself. And it's, I mean, more than her being likable, I wanted her to be authentic, and to really kind of show what I think internalized shame and internalized homophobia can look like and what the like repercussions of that might be.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about this language of love addiction.
Sure.
Because I'd never heard that term. I had to Google that term. At the same time, she had this idea of like people wanting people you can't have. Some of these interactions she has like felt so familiar, like embarrassingly familiar. So I was wondering why you chose to use the language of love addiction, and like whether you were, how to balance like that specificity of what she's going through and also a sense of like normality of like how common some of this is.
Yeah, I think that's a great, I like that question. Let me think for a second how to answer it. So, like, you're right. Like, one could read these, you know, instances of love addiction and really relate in some way. One might not relate at all and be like, wow, that's really, you know, unfamiliar behavior. But the reason that it's in this case is, you know, designated as love addiction is because it's really the central sort of, it's because of the underlying cause that is driving all of these like destructive and unattainable romances. And that root cause is a larger thing that causes her to it kind of causes her to engage in a cycle of like addictive, to continually fall into addictive patterns, like both like an eating disorder is a form of addiction, and then like obsession with other people in a romantic sense is also it's also like to the degree that you would put yourself in harm's way or like do damage to yourself is also a form of addiction. And so there's an underlying cause that I wanted to really get at here, which is why, you know, love addiction is a component of these, you know, relationships, or even they're asymmetrical relationships, but why they fall in that category.
Yeah, she's got a particularly damaging to herself and others way of pursuing the unattainable.
Yeah,
everybody does it, maybe not to that damaging, hopefully not to that damaging extent.
Right, that's exactly right. Everybody at some point, and that's the other thing, like I wanted, you know, I don't know anyone that can't relate to the experience of at one point or another, you know, wanting something that they can't have. And so in some way I wanted her to be at least accessible, you know, because not everybody has the experience of like falling for unattainable women and internalized homophobia and like being Arab and Muslim. So like in this way, there's that sort of universal thing, wanting what you can't have. Everyone's been there at some point in some way.
So I don't like, and when it comes to fiction, I don't like to go through everything that happens and say, is this based on real life? Is this based on real life? Because it's fiction. Right. But is there, broadly speaking, is there anything that you want to tell us about that was based on your life?
Yes. So the aspects of the novel that are based on my life are really the identity markers of the narrator, or they stem from the identity markers, like the fact that she's Palestinian American, like I myself am Palestinian American, the fact that she is queer, I'm queer, and I think the fact that in many ways there's difficulty when it comes to reconciling those identities, you know, I can relate to that as well. And so, but otherwise, the rest is like completely made up. Like the, you know, the pattern of falling in love with these unattainable women, and the like destructiveness and the sort of like painfulness, and like how, you know, all of that is, that's all fiction.
I'm glad for you. I'm glad that's not based on your life. That's a pretty unhappy cycle.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's funny because there were times when I was writing that I just felt so much empathy for her. I felt frustration with her. And I was like, please make the right choice and do something that's healthy for yourself and the people around you. But I couldn't really force her. Like, she had to arrive at that point by herself. And so I was just sort of following her along, allowing her to be true to like her backstory and just her behaviors and her patterns, the same way that I guess you can't like force somebody an alcoholic to stop drinking. They have to get there on their own. It felt the same way really with this character. I know, it's true. It's weird. Fiction does that. It takes on like characters take on a life of their own. Yeah.
Really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to force her to do better.
Exactly. It's a good lesson that you can't really force anybody, even fictional characters.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask a question about humor in this novel, because it's a pretty dark novel overall, but there is some humor in it, especially some sort of Black humor that so I was wondering if her time at the Ledge, the rehab center, was supposed to be funny or not. Sometimes I found it funny. And then there's that moment when everybody's hugging and Everybody Hurts is playing on the music, and she's just just so over the top. And I was like, okay, so maybe some of this is supposed to be funny. That's supposed to be funny a little bit.
It was totally supposed to be funny, like absolutely, you know, 100%. Because of the fact that why is it supposed to be funny? Well, for one thing, I mean, I wanted to bring some levity to the, you know, to a sort of rehab, you know, narrative, which she spends time in a rehab facility, and like I feel as though we don't always see the kind of, those two haven't always gone together, humor and like, you know, addiction narratives. So I wanted to put them together to bring some levity. Also, I mean, I think that the Ledge is meant to be like a ridiculous but like lovable and like well-intentioned place. It is kind of like there are watching her observations and her sort of initial reluctance and just like the way that she receives it is indeed meant to be funny. And at the same time, like there are serious moments that happen there, like breakthroughs that she has and insights that are really painful, and interactions as well. And I think that I had a teacher in grad school who once said like pain in writing can be hilarious. And I think that's so true, is that like sometimes when you render a painful experience in a humorous way, it can allow you to, I don't know, I think it's a really helpful way to arrive at a painful memory or a painful experience, both in nonfiction and in fiction. So yeah, like that everybody hurts moment is, you know, she's just like, what the hell, this is ridiculous. And there are, I mean, certainly that is kind of ridiculous, but at the same time she gets into it, you know, like it is what it is. And that's, I mean, I think that's true to her character, that like, yeah, she would be really resistant to this sort of setting and therefore her observations would be pretty funny about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I was a little impressed that she went to rehab, honestly. I was like, that's a good step for you.
Yeah, I feel like she did a good thing there as well. I mean, like there were moments, of course, where she made the right decision. And like those are the moments where I felt really proud of her. And I think that the interaction, or the what preceded her deciding to do so, was so traumatic that she realized like she had to. And so, yeah, I mean, it was like a confluence of incidents, but yeah, I'm proud of her that she did.
Yeah. I wanted to loop back to a couple of questions regarding identity. I was really impressed in how in the novel, how she is very clearly bisexual, like her bisexuality is on the page. She has affairs with men and women. And her Palestinian heritage is on the page, very much so. And there's this unfortunate controversy about how those things should be represented, or if they should be represented, which is really dismal. And I'm wondering if you had to fight to keep those elements in.
To keep the elements of her bisexuality and her Palestinianness?
Either one, yeah, or if you had to tone them down or keep them like they are, yeah.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, in one way I had to, I was sort of encouraged by like industry people to tone them up, to dial them up, which I myself didn't want to do, because I kind of wanted, often you read narratives where characters, let's say where characters are queer, and, you know, the industry has certain expectations for what one is allowed to do with like a queer character. And, you know, they have to, and above all, this, I think, kind of reduces that character and makes them really like one-dimensional, and flattens them and dehumanizes them, because they are just like reduced to that identity. Whereas I wanted this character to be a fully rounded, like, human being who had, you know, desires and shortcomings and, you know, what have you, just like any other human being, and to sort of allow for normalcy, or just like for her to be a three-dimensionalized person and also to be queer at the same time. I wanted those to coexist. And similarly with her, like, Palestinianness, her Arabness, like, oh my goodness, there was so much pressure from industry people to really like throw in, I think, a lot of, I don't know, exotic elements, like camels and spices. There is a camel in the book, but they wanted more camels, like spices from the marketplace, all sorts of like things that I found to be really othering. And so, and the same for like the queer aspect, like there were just so much pressure to sort of other her. And I was really trying to just have those identity markers, those like be just organically woven into who she is, rather than like forefronted for the sake of like fitting into like a convention or a like narrative expectation that the media and the publishing industry has. So.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, because there's this trend of like diversity in publishing, but often that means like we want this diverse character who is this identity. Like they don't just have this identity, like that is all they are.
It's really reductive, and it's really also oppressive, because you're only allowed to tell the story a certain way, you know, or portray the character in a certain way that fits with like an expectation. So it's not real. It's like kind of like fake diversity. or just like oppressive diversity. And so, yeah, I really resisted that. And honestly, that was a huge part of that made bringing this book from my computer to bookstores like a really uphill battle in many ways. Was really those expectations and resisting. I wasn't going to do that. So, yeah.
Good for you. So, and you can answer this question about yourself or your character, either one. But so she has these two different marginalized identities, and I'm wondering, and they both involve a little bit of duality, her split heritage and bisexuality. And I'm just wondering how those two things sort of impact and shape each other, or if there's similarities in the way that they impact you or the character, if there's any kind of overlap in those identities.
Yeah, so I think the in-betweenness that characterizes both her sexuality and her cultural background, I think that those in-betweennesses do interact both for her and for myself, insofar as they leave you feeling like alienated. And I think that's because you don't, people might say like, oh, it's lovely to have both, right? Or to have a foot in both worlds. But sometimes being both means that you don't fully belong to either. You're sort of an outsider for, each of the two things that you are in between. And so you feel really alienated and lonely. And in the case of this character, like her alienation and her loneliness, I think really are just a really part of her, because she, even her career choice, like she's a DJ, and it's a sort of lonely, alienating profession insofar as you're alone really in the booth, and you're operating on a totally different schedule as anybody else, as almost everybody else, and so there's like alienation that plays out in so many aspects of her life. Similarly, she's alienated from like a queer community, and that's partly because of this feeling of non-belonging and also this like internalized shame. But when she tries to get close to a form of queer community, she really struggles with that, because she doesn't feel like that belonging. And I think that the in-betweenness creates a sense of alienation, the in-betweenness in both of those identities.
It was a really realistic and horrible moment when her mother says, if only something about how like if you were just attracted to girls, but I don't remember it, but something about that, like how this is clearly fake because you're
some guy before.
That idea of you have to be one or the other or it's not real. And on that note, I did want to go back to something else beautiful from the Lit Hub essay, about having to have, how painful it is not to have one's experience validate, or having to live without your experience being validated, without external validation. And I don't know, I just found that really powerful. Like, how do you exist if people say that you don't?
Right.
And I was just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, right. Even like the mother in this case denying the fact, like saying that she must have either been lying then when she said she was in love with a man, or lying now when she says she's bisexual and in love with a woman, right? Like, and so like, that's really not validating. That's like the opposite of validating. And in so many ways, like, she is, the way that she exists, it's not accepted, for one thing, and so that alone like makes it not validated, right? Being queer, being Palestinian, being Muslim, like being like Arab, like these are not, you can't be queer and be Arab and Palestinian and Muslim in her I guess community and her family. And so that's why she spends a lot of the book, I think, negating herself. I think that lack of validation leads to self-negation. Like, I think that eating, an eating disorder like anorexia is a form of trying to like erase oneself. I think similarly, love addiction, where you asymmetrically pour, love or obsession into another person without you really being a part of the relationship at all, is also a way to erase oneself and like to negate oneself. The protagonist also has no name, the narrator, right? So like that's another form of her sort of existing less and negating and taking up less space. She has there are certain like romantic, I guess, relationships or just situations where she doesn't even have any words, like she doesn't speak. And so that the question, the answer to the question is like, what does it mean really for her, I guess, to live without external validation? That's really what it means and what it looks like. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, even the title reflects this need to like make herself erase herself. This title of "You Exist Too Much."
Right. I mean, so, right. The title "You Exist Too Much" comes from a line that the mother speaks to the narrator. And I mean, to say to someone "you exist too much," it's basically, you could phrase that as like, you need to exist less. And that's what she's constantly trying to do, is exist less. And yeah, so yeah, it's kind of tragic. But that's what's going on there.
So I want to ask you some questions about the process of writing this book.
Yeah.
Where did you get the idea for this, and how did that process sort of take shape?
Well, so the process, I studied philosophy as an undergraduate, and when I got to my MFA program and I think I was really, really steeped in sort of questions around freedom and choice and authenticity, which are, part of existentialist philosophy, and that's what I studied. And so I thought about those questions a lot. And, once I decided to locate that question of unattainability in these romantic relationships towards unattainable women, I guess the process was, I wrote the part at the ledge sort of straight through almost, and then I think I wrote certain elements of her backstory, like certain scenes that were set in the Middle East, or certain scenes that were set, in the US, but as a child. And then I wrote the romantic relationships. And I think it was I then printed out the whole book, and I taped the pages to the wall and rearranged them in a way that could allow for the memories to interact with the present day scenes, because part of my goal was to show how the past influences the present of a person, and how like a certain moment in one's present can maybe trigger a memory or speak to a memory that then also speaks to why that person is behaving the way they are in that specific moment. So that was a lot of the process, was like, I mean, there was writing it, and then there was like structuring it. And then there was a lot of stepping away from it so that I could like let the ideas marinate in my head, because in trying to answer the question of like, why does she set her sights on unattainable women, I didn't know the answer. And I had to let that question marinate in my mind after like a bout of writing. And so I would step away, I would go running, I would like have a drink and loosen my mind so that like ideas could come forward more. I would spend maybe like a few weeks away from it, which is hard to do, but I think important when you're writing anything, especially a book. So that was a process, for the most part.
Of the printed pages, it sounds like that's how you developed the structure with the flashbacks.
Totally.
Like physically putting the printed pages like that.
Exactly. Yeah. I actually had almost forgotten about how much of a process that was until I was looking through my camera roll and I saw a picture of my wall with all the pages, and I was like, that's right, I spent like years moving pages. So it was tough. It was tough, but.
I was wondering when you wrote this book, and what ways it was maybe influenced by the current events of the past few years, the things that have been happening. Obviously, you didn't write it, 2 months ago, but when you wrote it and how it might have been impacted by things that are happening.
Well, I mean, so I think, for me, the Palestinian aspect of this character's experience and just the sort of like lack of validation on a collective cultural level, on a political level, in the form of like just the sort of oppression that Palestinians face living under occupation, being denied basic human rights, like that lack of validation and those oppressions are very present today among marginalized communities in the United States, and especially like the Black community. And so I think that so much of like watching the way that marginalized communities in the US struggle for validation and for like really like basic rights in many ways, and for empowerment, was something that I was really reacting to in a lot of ways. I studied, so I did, before I decided to do an MFA and, sink my life into writing a book, I studied international affairs. I got a master's in that, and I worked at the UN and then a UN affiliated think tank. So I was always interested in like, I guess, international topics and also domestic like politics as well. So really, I did derive a lot of inspiration from that. And this book, actually, I hadn't thought about this, but I began writing it around the time of the Arab Spring, with like people seeking to empower themselves, and like just sort of like resisting. And the initial title of the book was Resist. So yeah, resistance movements have long been an inspiration to me. Yeah, it's funny that I changed the title. I forgot that I did. But that was the first title.
I like the "You Exist Too Much." I think that works better.
Much better, of course. Yeah, I agree. I like "You Exist Too Much" better because it's just so much more specific. And
well, I could still ask more questions, but I think first I'm going to open it up to the group. So if we could get everybody off mute, or whoever has a question, feel free to unmute yourself if you want to ask.
Feel free. You can ask me anything. John has a question.
Yeah, go right ahead.
What difficulties you have in getting an agent?
Did you say how much difficulty did I have?
In getting an agent.
Good question. Let's see. So so one time when I thought the book was done, like, 3 years before it was actually done, I sent it to agents who I'd met with when they came through at Iowa, and they all said no. And they gave me feedback, though. They said, here's why. So that was like a round of rejections. So then 3 years later, when I, after revising, I went out again with it. One of the first agents that I met with, who is now my agent, she was like, I like this. I'm not ready to take it on. I feel like something's up. And she was right, because I had changed the whole structure, like right before sending it and sent it to her. I'd flattened it all out and made it linear. And so we met, and she said, like, what, did you change the structure? And I was like, how did you know that? And so I then went back to the original structure and made some other edits, and then, sent it to her again. And she was like, yep, let's go. And so that was sort of the agent process. But certainly there was no, like, if I were to say that rejection wasn't a part of this experience, I would be completely lying. I mean, it's like a huge part of the experience, from the level of agents, from the level of like, just, I don't know, like workshop critiques, there's just a lot of like discouragement when it comes to writing a book, I think, for most people, not for everybody. But so yeah, that was the process. agent-wise. Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
So for anyone who hasn't read the book, Zaina, I want you to give the audience an overview of the camel scene and how she buys a $50 camel. And then tell us if the camel scene is a real thing that happened. Please say it.
No, I tried. It wasn't, unfortunately. But what happened? Okay, I should have saved that for the end. But like, no, she does buy a $50 camel. Like, right? She gets, that's part of the humor, I guess. I tried to make light in some ways, like her in-betweenness, her cultural in-betweenness is painful. In other ways, it's funny. Like, she goes to Egypt, you know, to sees the pyramids, and they ask her, do you want to ride the camel? And she says, okay, sure, you know, and the guy says it's $100 to ride a camel, but for you, because you're special, it's 50. And then she finds out later, after she pays him $50, that it's actually like 18 cents or something. So, but she didn't know. And her mother says, like, well, that's the price of the camel. Like, you own the camel now. So like, did that happen to me? No, but things like that. Of course, so many things like that have happened to me.
That's a great
so
moment.
Many.
I really liked her mom in that moment. I didn't like her mom a lot, but I really liked her mom in that moment.
I did too. I liked her mom in that. The mom could be I think the mom could be charming and lovable, but yes, also not. So I don't like that moment.
So if there are any other questions, somebody should go right ahead. If not, I just want to finish up by asking what's next for you.
I'm working on an essay collection, and it is based around Arabs and Muslims in the diaspora. So like Arabs living outside of Arab countries, and how they forge a sense of community and belonging in these adapted homelands. So that's like the main theme, and it also deals with just that's the theme. But I was saying this the other day, I find that I keep returning to like love stories, and even in these essays, like they often have a narrative, a driving narrative that's around love, as they explore these questions of like, how do diasporic Arab communities find a sense of home and belonging. And I'm also like looking at of Arabs and in the diaspora that are also marginalized within Arab communities, like queer Arabs for one thing, and you know, remember like trans Arabs that are trans. Like, there are a lot of like little sub communities, and I guess sometimes stigma around that, and how these things are becoming compatible or not, right? Arabness and queerness. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm enjoying it. I'm also writing another novel, but that's second after this essay collection, I guess. I like going back and forth between fiction and nonfiction. They really exercise different parts of your creative brain.
Yeah.
So
great.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That sounds really fascinating.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here. Thank you everyone for coming. We will be doing more virtual events until we can reopen again, whenever that will be. So keep an eye on our Facebook and our Twitter for virtual events. Quill Ridge Books is beginning to do virtual events, so keep an eye on their website as well. Remember that you can order from them and the book will be signed. Zaina, thank you very much.
So thank you to everybody for being here, and thank you, Brittany, for honestly, those were the most thought-provoking and thoughtful questions, and I really enjoyed this conversation with you. It means a lot, and you obviously read the book with great care, and I appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, you be safe.
Yes, you too. You too. Be safe, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care. All right. Mm-hmm.